Okay, and we're live.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Pillar 3 Advisory Committee meeting. I'm Olivia Pearson, and I'm excited to start this new year with Pillar 3. We have our entire Pillar 3 committee here this afternoon, along with some invited guests. And so there is a new structure this year. And so I want to defer to Kirkland to discuss our new leadership structure for the 24-25 school year.
Thank you, Livia. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kirkland Murray. I'm President and CEO of Anne Arundel Workforce Development Corporation and the local workforce board. I'm also president of the Maryland Workforce Association, which is the association of the 13 workforce boards. And as you know, Blueprint Pillar 3 included the local workforce boards to work with the LEAs in the community and the community colleges to provide career counseling for all middle and high school students. So with that said, this year, we have elected new officers or leads to the committee, and Olivia representing an LEA and myself representing the local workforce boards will be co-chairs. Dave Harper with Chesapeake Community College, who was the previous co-chair, has agreed to stay on to be secretary of this committee. So that will be the leadership for this committee for this year. So we're very excited about this. We think it's a great opportunity to represent all the major players and part of Pillar 3, especially when it comes to the career counseling piece. So, Olivia, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much. So let's just do a quick check-in with the rest of the committee members. And so I'm going to start with Dave.
Thank you, Kirkland and Olivia. Glad to join everybody from Chesapeake College on Maryland's beautiful Eastern Shore. And I pass to Robin.
Hi, everyone. Robin Werner, Director of Teaching and Learning for Talbot County Public Schools. And I will pass to Nona.
There we go. Nona Carroll with the Maryland Business Roundtable for Education, and I will pass to Aisha.
Hi, everyone. I'm Isha, the student member of this advisory board. I'm from Howard County. And I'll pass it to Libby.
Hi, everybody. I'm Libby Diamond from the AIB, and I'll pass it to Gretchen.
Hi, everyone. Gretchen Cheney. I'm also with the AIB. I'm not sure who to pass it to. Who's next?
Well, I think we can go with our guests. And so we've got several guests here today. We've got guests from MSDE, along with LEAs and community colleges. So we'll start with our MSDE guests. I see Tracy, so I'll start with you.
Everyone, thank you so much for the invitation. Tracy Kittle, Director of Apprenticeships and Industry Recognized Credentials at MSDE. And because I've asked my wonderful coworker to drive safely, I'd also like to introduce Pam Clay, our Queen of the Eastern Shore, who is en route, hopefully quicker than last time back home. So she is also here listening. And thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. We have Dr. Miller, who we invited from Garrett County.
Hello, everyone. Nicole Miller, Garrett County Chief Academic Officer and Blueprint Coordinator. And just glad to be here with you today. I think Molly, our strategic facilitator, will be joining us soon.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. We also have Christy Dreyer.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Vice President of Academic Programs at Cecil College, and I'm the current chair for the Community College Chief Academic Officers.
Thank you. And Molly, are you in a position to introduce yourself?
Yes, I am. Thank you all. Can you hear me okay? Sorry, I'm in between meetings, so I will be on camera in a bit, but Molly Mesnard, and I am from the Governor's Workforce Development Board CTE Committee.
Thank you, Molly. And last but not least, we've invited 2 colleagues from Prince George's County Public Schools. And so I will start with Dr. Victoria Holmes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Victoria Holmes, Coordinating Supervisor for Language and Literacy in the Office of Curriculum and Instruction.
Good afternoon. I am Simone McQuaige. I am the Elementary Reading Language Arts Supervisor.
Okay, thank you. Is that everyone?
I think Molly also just joined us. If you just want to say hello, Molly.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to join you today. I'm a strategic facilitator. I get to work with Dr. Miller and the rest of the Garrett County team. And we're going to talk a little bit about our MTSS framework a little bit later in the call.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to hand it over to Dave to just give an overview of Pillar 3. We've got a lot going on today, a lot of guests invited.
Thank you very much, Olivia. This great idea from Kirkland Murray, who just kind of reminds us that Pillar 3 is a huge pillar. Not that they all aren't significant. They are very substantial. The heart of the blueprint, Dr. Kerwin once said, is college and career readiness. And if you look at the 5 pillars, there's an acknowledgement with Pillar 1, early childhood education, that path to college and career readiness starts early, that it is shepherded by high quality and diverse teachers and leaders, which need lots of support. That's Pillar 2. The heart being that college and career readiness standard, which Blueprint aims to ensure as many students as possible by the end of 10th grade can achieve, so that they can begin their path toward a career through IRCs and apprenticeships, or toward college through dual enrollment college classes that they can get transcripted. That resources and additional resources are sometimes necessary for certain populations and for students who can be successful with a little extra support. And then finally, that 5th pillar, the accountability and implementation board, which ensures that we're on track and provides support statewide to all the various constituents that are coming together and merging efforts toward that college and career readiness. So very brief overview of Pillar 3. This is a huge slide with lots of words on it, and we just don't have to go through it in any kind of detail, but it's a visual that does indicate that there are at least 4 chunks to the Pillar 3 that we work on. Today's conversations, which have to do with the literacy pathways and supports, and with apprenticeship and IRC, or industry recognized credential check-ins. Those are really about the orange and the gray sections, those 3rd and 4th sections of Pillar 3, which I'll just review briefly. It begins, Pillar 3, with that first section, the standard, that there has to be a standard. If you're going to assess college and career readiness, you have to have an assessment to implement, to kind of measure everybody by the same ruler as much as you can. And so the 3.1, the first section in green here, is just establishing that standard that we hope everyone can meet by the end of their 10th grade year. Then the blue section, the second part of Pillar 3, is again that acknowledgement that you got to start early, and you have to make sure that you are keeping students on track and giving them chances to recalibrate if they're off track. So that's intensive intervention for K through 3 students who are identified as struggling in reading. It's tracking systems. It's supplemental services. And here I'll just zoom in just a touch to that second section. Keeping students on track to meet that by the end of their 10th grade year. Then if they measure or assess as college and career ready, well, what opportunities do they have? That's the orange section, the 3rd part. And those are junior and senior pathways for dual enrollment, for industry recognized credential earning through their CTE pathways, for apprenticeship opportunities in real world business and industry. And then the gray section, the final, is really about the artifacts or what results from students getting these new opportunities. It's career counseling programs implemented beginning in middle school. It's 45% of high school students completing. So their IRCs or their apprenticeships in addition to the traditional diploma. And it's these other CTE reports and groups like the expert review teams that visits schools to make sure everyone's on track and to share and disseminate best practices to support the statewide implementation. It's the goals that result. It's the standards that are developed. So that's my best shot at reminding everybody that our conversations today have to do with the literacy pathway or the literacy support, which is about keeping students on track, and about the IRCs and the apprenticeships, which is about the orange section or the gray section. That's my best shot at it, Kirkland. We're going to try to do this every committee meeting to some point. See how we do. Thank you, Libby.
Thank you. Okay, so we are just moving along. And so I'm going to pass it to Gretchen to provide some updates from the AIB on some Pillar 3 specific work.
Thank you, Olivia. Hi, everyone. Just a couple quick updates, some key AIB deadlines coming up. We just want to flag for everybody, particularly around career counseling partnerships. The AIB requires annual reports on implementation, and the career counseling fiscal reports are due to the AIB today. This is the second piece of a required submission, and the AIB will be reviewing those submissions and providing feedback on the fiscal report and the narrative report that was already submitted earlier together. So once we get everything in, we will do a review of everything. So that's all just kind of a report on how year one of implementation went out in the field. And we're going to look across everyone and give an update. So that's expected today. And then secondly, if counties intend to review their, revise their MOUs, their agreements, those updated versions need to be submitted to the AIB by November 12. This is a required part of the LEA Blueprint Implementation Plan, which requires AIB approval and release of Blueprint funds, including career counseling funds. So it's a very important component. Oh, we got the slide updates. There you go. So each county determines if it needs to submit a revised MOU. Some counties might think their MOUs are fine as is. They were written and they encompass the plan for implementation this year. Nothing changed. But for example, if job descriptions or job titles have changed, the MOU is no longer accurate, it needs to be updated and resubmitted. And the budget piece also needs to reflect the allocations for this year. So if needed, a revised budget addendum can be submitted as needed. So we're leaving it up to the different counties to assess their needs in terms of whether they need to submit an MOU that is updated. So hopefully everyone is aware of the different guidance and is up to speed on whether they're getting that turned into us by November 12th. So if you have any questions, just let me know.
Hey, Gretchen, I have a question on this. I know for my county, when we got our initial feedback on our MOU, there was one of the main parts that was comment on is the implementation plan. I think all of the MOUs really did not have a good implementation plan because of the timing. Is that one of the things that if you did not originally have an implementation plan, is that something that's going to be required that you have to have that implementation plan for the updated MOU?
I think not. I think the turnaround time is just too tight. And so I think there's going to be an acknowledgement that there's still pieces that need to be built out this year.
Okay.
So I think the feedback that was in place from last year still is going to hold, and I think they're going to provide a date when that will be expected sometime during this school year. But this is more about just making sure what is in the actual written document still reflects the partnership agreements at their core, kind of how partners are going to work together, and the money pieces of it, less about expecting a full scope and sequence and a full kind of understanding of how it's being delivered in the schools, because in a lot of counties that's still being sorted out. So does that help?
That was perfect. That's the answer I was hoping you were going to say.
That's what you hope I said. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
I think that's it. I just had those two updates. So those are my two deadlines reminders.
Hey, thank you so much, Gretchen. So let's move to LEA literacy plans, support pathways, and we are fortunate to have two LEAs here today to really just share about how they are starting to address literacy planning. And a lot of our conversation up until this point, really we focused on the high school journey. And so it's great to also be able to talk today about college and career readiness from an earlier perspective. And so we're going to start with Garrett County, Dr. Miller and I don't want to mispronounce your name, so Miss Molly.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to share some loose slides that we prepared, but really I'm going to talk for a little bit and then you're going to get a chance to hear from Dr. Miller about implementation. But really we wanted to start with a little bit of framing as to why the deep focus on MTSS and why that was so essential as a part of our Pillar 3 work. And so when you look at Blueprint, really, there is this focus on students being CCR by the end of 10th grade. And there is, the support pathways that extends beyond 10th grade for students who've not been able to meet that bar. But if you sort of follow that thread back to early elementary school, what you see is that there is a real need for identifying students who are not on track to be CCR along their educational journey. And in some of the guidance documents that go along with the Blueprint, they lift up this idea of early warning indicators, right? But along the way, this is not about, hey, it's Johnny's in 8th grade, he's in 9th grade. Let's talk about whether or not he's on track to being CCR. This is about a system of supports that are designed to identify Johnny's strengths and his areas of need, and to provide that additional support, whether it be through intensive intervention or small group instruction within the classroom along his educational journey, so that he's getting what he needs to be on the path to being CCR, which is the ultimate sort of destination for our kiddos. So at its core, what this legislation is about and what Pillar 3 is about is designing that system of support that is necessary to follow all of our students and provide them with the assistance that they need to meet these academic outcomes and to be able to show evidence of being CCR by the end of 10th grade. So that's the framing that we started with and why we went deep in our exploration of MTSS. We started this summer by basically convening a group of stakeholders who were very knowledgeable on the instructional side and sort of worked with them to develop some shared learning and engage in problem solving with the end goal to really design a playbook for a multi-tiered system of support for our schools. And that committee, it consisted of secondary principals, elementary principals, math and ELA teachers. We had some folks from central office. Dr. Miller participated in this group. And then we also had elementary teachers and interventionists. So we kind of empowered them to do this work. We aligned on the research to design a better system of supports for our students. Again, so that we are following them throughout their journey and increasing their likelihood of meeting that longer-term CCR destination. This was framing we actually put in front of them, and I think it's really powerful because we started by saying this is not about Blueprint, actually. Yes, Blueprint calls for this system of support, but actually this is about best practices that we know benefit our students. For us, it was also shifting from RTI to MTSS. We had to refine some of our processes because we had just purchased Panorama and we wanted to integrate that into our system. we also wanted to be really clear that this was system level change. So we had to produce something that was clear, that the guidance and that playbook had to really serve as a strong communication tool to help bring people along to understand the process and the expectations. And we really empowered the stakeholders in the group to be in the driver's seat and to help inform and shape our vision for what MTSS looks like in Garrett County. And we drew upon a lot of the research from the American Institute of Research. They have an MTSS hub, and we kept coming back to these 4 critical components of MTSS. Now, it can be overwhelming out there when you're trying to sort of figure out a research anchor for reimagining your system of support. There's a lot of stuff out there, and a lot of the stuff is actually really pretty dense and inaccessible. But this hub gave us a lot of tools to draw from that we could put in front of our leaders and say, what does this look like in Garrett County? So those components are screening, database decision-making, evidence-based interventions, and progress monitoring. We also showed them the sort of research distillation here in the blue box. There is a ton of evidence that when you actually design your instructional system to have these embedded supports and to empower teachers to make database decisions, that you are actually improving outcomes for kids, you're decreasing the achievement gap, and you're addressing some of the disproportionality that is so prevalent across so many of our schools. And the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to Dr. Miller is we also looked at this. So there are these components, right? The structures. You've got to have the tests to screen, and then you've got to have the tests for progress monitoring and the instructional materials to provide the evidence-based interventions. But on a whole, what does this system look like? And really, it is this tiered approach. We focused on this idea of all students, some students, and few students to help differentiate between what is happening at each of the tiers. And we developed a powerful tool of do's and don'ts for each tier to help teachers understand the distinction. You know, one of the things that came up is, well, what is a small group in tier 1? Is that actually a tier 2? Can a student actually get tier 2 and tier 3 at the same time in math? And this sort of schema helped us recalibrate a little bit on how the system should look as a whole. And so we're a couple of months in terms of launching and training folks on our playbook. And so Dr. Miller, I'll turn it over to you to share a little bit with these folks about how things are going.
Okay. So Molly mentioned earlier that our playbook is our key communication tool. We have been spending a good bit of time in it as we roll out this new framework. And we really felt that it was important that this playbook be informed by our stakeholders, our teachers, our administrators, boots on the ground in the schools. And so after our time learning and exploring and really digging into the research around MTSS and gathering their feedback, we were really well equipped to put together this playbook. And what you'll notice is that it includes some specific evidence-based strategies. The committee was very intentional about not overdoing the number of strategies we're going to try to tackle in 1 year. I feel like it's important to share with the group that the committee that is working on this was also charged with mapping this out over a 3-year timeline. It was very important knowing that the lift was so heavy that we really mapped this out in a way that we could phase the approach and ensure that our teachers are getting the very best supports in learning this. So you'll see on the screen some of the strategies that we elevated for year 1. And we also developed some protocols for each section of the cycle of continuous improvement, which I believe is on the next screen. I'll also share that we did launch this at the beginning of the year with our ANS group, our administrators and supervisors in August. And then we provided an overview of the playbook at the back to school professional learning. And since then, we have officially launched cycle 1 for both secondary and elementary grades. On this screen, you'll be able to see the contents of what I mean when I say a cycle of improvement. You can see that the cycle starts with digging into our data, really understanding where students are performing, and also setting goals. It moves very intentionally into a learning component where staff learn collaboratively and understand best practice to implement in their classroom, which is obviously the third phase, implement the new learning. And then it comes to the final section of monitor, assess, and adjust practice. So when we think of our professional learning in Garrett County, as we launch this cycle of improvement, our teachers are engaging in this process during a 6 to 8 week cycle. And so are our district leaders. And you can see that in the orange on the screen that we're also intensely involved in implementing the cycle at the district level. A couple of things I would also add about this particular slide is that the committee really looked at about 5 different cycles, and that working committee really ended up anchoring on the learning forward cycle and taking some of what we really liked from other cycles and kind of infusing it into what we are calling the Garrett County Public School cycle. But it is grounded in learning forward because that cycle was the most generalizable and easy for us to align with. We go to the next slide. You'll see a little bit more about how we're phasing this work. Again, this was informed by our MTSS committee. We really felt it important in year 1 to learn the cycle of improvement and then really focus on just a few deep dives into evidence-based strategies. So cycle 1 is primarily focused on executing the components of the cycle of improvement, and we're really honing in on tier 1 core instruction for that. And then our cycle 2 will move us into the supplemental instruction components and looking at data with tiers 2 and tiers 3. So you've heard me say a couple of times that we really wanted to hone in on some specific evidence-based strategies. One of the primary strategies we're focused on within our system, it's a very cross-cutting strategy. It can apply to ELA, it can apply to math, really any subject area, but it's specific to explicit instruction, ensuring that we have explicit instruction happening in every single classroom in our school system. This was also elevated as a strategy that the committee really felt was going to be valuable as we start this approach, and they elevated it as the priority for year 1. It also helps us ensure that we're having frequent engagement, high student engagement, frequent teacher-student talk, and ensuring that that students are intricately involved in the learning process, regardless of the tier, whether you're in tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. So how are we monitoring our progress? We're doing that in a few ways. The first way is through a professional learning survey. So I mentioned the start of the year, we did some professional development. We've since followed that up with some very targeted PL for secondary teachers, as well as last week, we just dove into elementary, and coming up in a few weeks, we're going to have grade level specific PL specific to explicit instruction as part of our learning part of the cycle. But on this screen, you're just seeing a snapshot of our very early professional learning opportunities for our staff. And one of the things we really wanted to focus on was how relevant the content was to staff, if they were able to apply the learned content in their classroom, and probably most importantly, how confident they are in applying that new knowledge and skill to their classroom. And what we've learned early on is that our professional learning is relatively well received by our teachers. They're feeling that it's relevant. They're feeling that they can apply the learning, but you'll notice that the lowest scores are in the confidence level, which triggers to us that we're having to, there's a need amongst our staff to pour more support, more learning, and greater emphasis in the learning part of the cycle, the professional development. So where do we go now? Well, we're right in the midst of cycle 1, down in the weeds and learning as we go. We are working towards bringing our MTSS committee back again at the end of the month. And that time is going to be spent really engaging on how things are going. We've identified a few problems of practice through the early implementation that we're going to elevate and discuss with our instructional leaders and teachers. And then we're also, we need to get further feedback from this group on finalizing our curriculum lesson study protocols and walkthrough tools. And so this will be an opportunity for them to give feedback and allow us to put a stamp on those 2 protocols that will go into our playbook and be implemented during cycle 2. And I'm going backwards to the slide before, but the walkthrough tools is another way that we're focused on monitoring progress. So as we work through getting that tool finalized and then eventually into the cycle of implementing that, we'll be able to understand how the professional learning that we're conducting through this cycle of improvement is actually being realized in the classroom. And I think that ends my portion. I'm certainly available, as is Molly, for questions, but that's where we're at. That's what our emphasis is. It is cross-cutting between ELA and math. I know today's focused on literacy, but we're able to use this approach for both content areas, which is exciting.
I have a couple questions. Can I ask now?
Yeah.
So are you using this system to be put in place for your CCR support pathways? And how are you, where is this data, where is this information stored? Like, where are your plans stored?
So that's a great question. I'm going to start with the second half. So we had a RTI process in place in Garrett County historically. It has been more, it's more robust at the elementary level, and that data is kept in PowerSchool right now. As a part of this rebranding and really kind of diving in on how can we make our MTSS process richer and more efficient and effective for our county, we knew we needed a better tool in order to document this information, whether it be the data that's coming in from Universal Screeners, MCAP, or when it comes to actually designing the plans for students and ensuring the supports are documented and in place. So we have identified Panorama as that tool, and we purchased that for this school year. We're in very early implementation, and it kind of goes along with our phased approach. We knew it was going to take time to get all of the data integration to occur into that platform. And so the fall semester has been dedicated to ensuring that that has occurred. And we are just about gearing up for training here very soon to train our staff on the tool itself. And we're looking for early implementation in January. So moving forward in our 3-year plan, all of the documented supports will be in Panorama, documented in Panorama. And you'll have to ask your first part of the question again, because I got.
So we use MTSS in Talbot County, but where we're having a hard time is MTSS captures more students for a variety of different reasons, right? Like discipline, attendance issues. It's not always academic. Sometimes it's a combination. So where we're struggling, and I think I could speak for a lot of my colleagues across the state, is if we already have students on MTSS plans, how can we also capture plans for CCR support when they're in high school without duplicating a process that we already have? Where we run into problems is historically over the years, our school counselors have been like the lead for MTSS, but that's not always appropriate when there are academic issues. Like if there are reading issues for a child, it doesn't make sense it makes more sense for a reading specialist or interventionist to report data and lead those calls. So that's where we're struggling as we like make that transition. So it sounds to me that you're kind of using this as students move along. If they are still identified as support, this would be the pathway that you follow for CCR support in high school, but you're just identifying them with screening tools.
Up through 10th grade.
Yeah.
So once they get past 10th grade, if they're not CCR, then we would flip into the non-CCR individualized plan. Which is a completely different plan, housed in a completely different location. So yes, I think largely the answer to your question is it is the bulk of our support path is through the MTSS. However, we do have some opportunities built into our secondary schedule. When I say secondary, I mean 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th, all the way up to provide some more intensive interventions as a course, if that makes sense. So that would be above and beyond the MTSS.
Yeah, and I think too, Robin, I think that's a really important question that you're lifting up. And, we had some foundation to build as it relates to the system of supports. Right, it's one thing to have a screener and identification mechanism, and then a system for documentation, right? And then it's another thing to have a system of instructional supports that are designed to help, move students from tier 2, needing tier 2 support to ultimately not needing tier 2 support, and just being able to meet grade level expectations in tier 1. So for instance, in some cases, we had a gap between tier 1 happening, and then there wasn't necessarily a layer of support, and then there was tier 3. And also in secondary, some of those tiered supports, they weren't necessarily tiered in terms of when you really think about increasing the dosage of support for a student. It was like almost like a study hall or a block where students could opt into instructional support, but it was really left up to them. So we really wanted to focus on building the opportunity into the school day from K through 12 for students to receive evidence-based instruction across the tiers. And there was quite a distance for us to go, just when you consider the fact that in some cases, tier 2 happening was a little bit of a gap here and there. And then certainly we had to shift some mindsets around what evidence-based intervention looks like, especially at the secondary level. And I think once, as we strengthen those things, I think we'll then be able to also turn our attention to some of the documentation pieces that are required, especially at the secondary level with those individual learning plans.
Yeah. The final point that I would add, just as a point of hopefully helpfulness, one of the things that really helped our team was the intensification practices that are lifted up in the AIRS research. Those intensification practices were an aha moment. So I would definitely, when thinking about a support system, specifically multi-tiered systems of support, intensification practices are huge, and they're really helping us inform how this work looks at each of the tiers.
Thank you both so much. That was very rich. That was very rich. So thank you. I want to ask if there are any other questions. I know we want to get to Prince George's County, and then we have an IRC discussion also in the last 40 minutes of our meeting. So any last questions for the Garrett County team? Okay, thank you, ladies, so much.
Welcome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, so I would like to introduce again Dr. Victoria Holmes and Ms. Simone McQuaige, who are focused on literacy in Prince George's County Public Schools. And I asked them to come and just share a little bit about how PGCPS is addressing early literacy.
All right, so hello again, and I'll get started and then Simone will take over. So as you know, a part of our blueprint requires that we have a comprehensive literacy plan. And so that plan actually began, I want to say 7 or 8 years ago, when the Striving Readers Grant was available for each LEA to apply. And part of the requirement for that was to have a comprehensive literacy plan. And at the time, it was a birth to grade 12 plan, where we were looking at populations of multilingual learners, as well as students in I want to say poverty, but I know there was correct language for that. So we had at that time developed a comprehensive plan that really just talked about how we were addressing our struggling readers and writers, and what programs were available, interventions, and what have you for the students that we were targeting for that. And so now moving forward with the blueprint, again, it asks that we go back and then review those plans, revise those plans to ensure that the science of reading research is included. And so over the past couple of years, we've been going through the process of revising. We recognized that we had a lot of information in several different places. And so now pulling all those pieces together in one comprehensive plan is what we're striving to do at this time. And part of that, and I know in the overview of our Pillar 3, as someone spoke about, it's really, targeting what's happening in early literacy, so that this CCR is not just what happens when students get to high school, but how do we start to intervene at an early age in ensuring that students are filling those gaps in our primary grades. And so Simone is our supervisor for our elementary reading language arts department. And so she will go into what our timeline has been in just adjusting and shifting from what we were currently doing in our literacy program to what we are now doing today based on the science of reading.
Thank you, Dr. Holmes. And so what you see here is kind of our science of reading journey. At the top, you see the drivers, and underneath, you see our actions. I do want to start by saying that when we look at a timeline of these pieces, the timeline really started in a sense, I want to say, the year of the pandemic. So in 2020, many of the districts across the state were making determinations around what their screener was going to be according to their universal screener, according to the Ready to Read Act, and how they were further going to provide some supplemental instruction. We started to take a look at some of our practices and looked at some of the structures that we needed to look at revising. And so part of that, one of the biggest pieces around that was to make sure before we could message something to our entire district that we invested the time and energy ourselves as a department, as leadership, to have an understanding of what the science of reading was. And so we did not do that as a singular department. We started to bring in our colleagues from special ed and the Office of English Language Development to learn right along with us. It was really important for us to have allies in this work so that we're all talking to our teachers around the same things as we're moving forward and developing an understanding. And that first cohort of folks to start to do that work actually happened when we kicked off letters. At that time, the fall of the pandemic in 2020, 240 educators, central office personnel, as well as reading leaders decided to trust us and embark on this journey with us. At the same time, we were looking at, determining what our screener was going to be and how we were to utilize this data. We had just gone through a textbook adoption, and so we were really scrutinizing the materials that we had selected based on what we were learning. And I know that was happening, ongoing conversations with colleagues across the state. Within that, it was important with a district our size that we had to take a look at shoring up our Tier 1 instruction, but looking at what supports we could provide. And at the time, especially during the pandemic, we wanted to look at some digital instructional resources for supplemental instruction, looking at the materials that were a part of those digital platforms, and then looking at how teachers could use that for focus group and small group instruction. But we couldn't just say, here's a platform and just isolate it, because we know that the platform can't do all of the work that our teachers can do. We really needed to look at our professional development and how we were getting the message out there. So it was one thing during that time having professional development after school, but we needed to look at kind of layering that. And so we developed pathways of training for our teachers around letters. We actually had a conference for our teachers and administrators to participate in, as well as inviting consultants to do work within our district. And this is an ongoing piece. It wasn't something that we just did during one time. Through the use of the Maryland Leads Grant, we had opportunities to continue to strengthen our plans around what kinds of training were provided. It gave us an opportunity to also bring in our administrators and talk about the ongoing monitoring that needed to happen of the instructional program. Last but not least, we needed to layer that with additional supports. So we offered a varied tutoring program over these years from the use of the materials that you see here. Many of our tutoring programs started out after school. We are now doing offering tutoring opportunities during the school day. So I think as we move forward, we're constantly looking at our data to take a look at what the needs are of our students. We're strengthening our professional development plans so that it was one thing around making sure that we were providing professional development across the board to support our teachers and strengthening their knowledge, helping them understand that this is not a one-stop deal, that you just go to training this year and check it off the list, you're done. This is truly about embedding ourselves in the work, creating opportunities for our teachers to participate in professional learning communities. That has been part of our focus for this year as the next layer. So it's one thing to have the initial professional development, but now what does that look like in the practice each and every day? Let's talk about application. So we have had professional learning communities with every grade level, with teachers, some of our teachers coming during the day and some of our teachers coming in the evening. We just finished a session last night and had approximately 100 teachers present in the work, wanting to continue to build their capacity. And we're very excited about that. We also have teachers involved in book studies with some of our consultants to continue their learning. We are planning to continue this work with our administrators. So understanding that this wasn't part of, again, a one-stop deal where we're meeting with our principals throughout the school year. We met with them all last year, and we're continuing that work through data cafes, as well as professional development meetings to support them in monitoring instruction in their schools. Are there any questions? Anything else that you're wondering that we can provide further information on?
I actually did have one question regarding the tutoring. So you mentioned school day tutoring and how the tutoring would be implemented into the school day, but how would you make sure that you don't meddle with the actual learning during the school day and don't take away from the learning that's going on?
That's an excellent question. One of the things that we put in place was creating a scheduled time when teachers are doing rotations for their focus groups. So the time that this teacher is working with a focus group and students are working independently is a perfect time for, while the teacher is working with one group, the tutor is pulling a group and working during that time. So it is something that we've closely worked with schools to schedule so that our students aren't missing any part of that content. I wouldn't say it is perfect in the schedule at all times, but we are working really closely with our schools in creating a schedule for their tutors. Through one of our programs, we have retired teachers who are utilizing the Phonics for Reading program and tutoring some of our schools that have the highest needs. So they're providing that support. So there are different layers of support in different for our different schools based on their needs.
Thank you so much. Any other questions for the PGCPS team?
I just want to say thank you for coming in and sharing your process.
You're quite welcome. I know it sounds, you see the boxes and it's like, oh, these are the steps, but it is quite detailed. We create with our leadership, we created a communication plan that kind of lays out our expectations for each of our stakeholders, what that looks like within assessment, what that looks like within professional development and ongoing monitoring.
Each of those steps is a big step, especially for a large county, because that's a lot of staff to have that implementation done with fidelity at once. That's a lot. So kudos to you guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Okay, so it looks like we are a little behind on the schedule, but we are going to catch up. We've got the discussion now as a check-in on IRCs. And somehow I just lost the agenda. Let me go back. IRCs and apprenticeships. And so I am going to actually invite Tracy Kittle. Is that correct? Did I pronounce it?
Great, Olivia. That is correct.
All right, thank you. So Tracy, are you able to provide any updates for us regarding IRCs and apprenticeships?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you again for having us here. I am going to lean a little bit more into the industry recognized credential piece of the conversation for today's dialogue, just because we are anxiously anticipating the AIB's approval of the current policy so that we can move forward with implementation. So because the IRC process has already gone through, all avenues, I do want to definitely focus our attention there. So what I'm going to throw in the chat is a link to the industry recognized credential website that really houses how MSDE has operationalized the IRC process and the policy that was created by the CTE committee for this current cycle. And so what you're going to see when you go to that landing page, I'm not sure if I have permission here to share. It looks like I might. If you are looking at the same page as me, you will be able to see the definitions as defined in the CTE committee policy, as well as the criteria that are driving this work. And then this step piece down here on application process, you're going to see the application form that folks will be able to use to submit a new IRC request, as well as a very detailed sample of the artifacts that are required in order to justify the application. So this is just a sample template. It is not a mandate, but it is a template. And then if you go through the pages, you're going to be able to see live links to various forms of artifacts that are going to help the committee on our side make appropriate recommendations to the CTE committee, as is our role in this process. And so just to catch everyone up, Molly and her team have done an absolute tremendous work over the past year plus, working through the policy. The AIB approved it with recommendations. It came back to MSDE for implementation in August of this year. And on August 26th, we were able to formally launch the application process with this documentation of artifacts. We've really workshopped that with LEAs, and then we're working with Molly around what that looks like as industry partners. Also have, of course, a lot of enthusiasm for submitting IRCs for consideration as well. So that's sort of the current update on where IRCs are. What we're experiencing on MSDE's side is that our LEAs, it took them a little bit of time to identify exactly, what we needed to verify artifacts. Again, we were getting documents that would just say, we support this IRC, signed so-and-so, and they would kind of send in their document and there'd be some workshopping around the quality of artifacts that would need to be submitted. So I can pause there, but I also have some additional information I can share around the larger CCR conversation that we've had today.
Can I just ask one question, Tracy? Is there an update regarding some of the programs that are traditionally more college-bound CTE programs that do not have IRCs, or we're still searching for IRCs? I know that was speaking with our CTE department and some of our teachers, like particularly business marketing, has been an issue, and that is an example of a program where typically students would go on and earn an associate or a bachelor's degree. And I know at one point there was a discussion that for some of those CTE programs, there would be consideration that dual enrollment could count towards an IRC. Is there any update with those programs?
So I'm gonna pass this over to Molly here. She knows it's coming because I asked her this same question. We discussed it back and forth recently. And so I do understand where there is not an IRC. There's of course this potential for post-secondary credit, but Molly, I know you are well prepared because you get this question often.
Thank you, Tracy. Thanks, Robin, for the question. So the status of that provision, so the AIB did give feedback around that provision, and the CTE committee discussed that feedback at our last meeting, but decided to move forward without making any changes to that element of the policy. So the next steps there are really MSDE and MHEC working together on putting together really like clear guardrails and guidance around, you know, which degrees and sort of which level of credit and so forth would count towards that. So that process is still ongoing. So no like clear updates there. But again, yeah, the purpose there is really, you know, it'll be very like specific scenarios.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I have a question as well. I see that the deadline is, I guess, the end of this month. Is that like an end deadline? Is there going to be a period like every couple of years that, you know, as things change, there may be, as the market changes, as education changes? So is there any thought about, you know, what that would be after this deadline this year?
That was all thoughtfully considered in the architecture of the policy. And so the way that it will currently be framed annually is that LEAs will have from August 1st until October 31st each year to make their proposal for new IRCs. And then to your point around labor markets changing quite quickly, and we want to, you know, stay relevant. Every 2 years, MSDE and the CTE committee will go through the IRCs to make sure that we are keeping on pace and staying in demand with current field and industry needs.
Okay, thank you.
I also wanted to add that LEAs are trying to work smarter than harder on this and are talking amongst each other, like CTE directors and local PACs and teachers are communicating so that they're not duplicating work, and then also giving MSCE duplicate copies of the same application. So that has been something I think that is helpful, of everyone kind of communicating on what needs to be added and how they can collaborate on an application. So I think that is some progress as well with that system.
Thank you, Robin, for adding that. So we have an e-community at MSDE for all of our CTE directors, and they've made a request for weekly updates of the IRCs that have been submitted so that they can work smarter, not harder, as Robin had just stated. And so they can also support each other in those application and artifact submissions. So that has also helped align the work.
Hey, Tracy, can you please remind everybody the role of the local workforce boards in this and clarify, if LEA is presenting a new IRC, does it need to be approved by the local workforce board?
I can jump in as well, Tracy, if that's helpful. Thanks, Kirk. So the role of the of the local workforce development boards is definitely for, LEAs or employers, whoever's applying, to work with their local workforce development board, not only in providing possibly a letter of support, but also specifically regarding sort of some of the labor market data and so forth, just to show that occupation, is in demand, or that IRC is in demand in the local area. So I believe in the artifacts that Tracy shared, there's a sample there as well of, a support letter from the local workforce board and so forth.
But it's not required.
I don't know. I gotta go and look, to be honest, Kirk, offhand.
That is certainly an option to explore, Kirk. I know our LEAs have expressed that as local workforce boards would like to be the beneficiaries of these IRCs, that they of course want partnership. They of course, you guys have access to Lightcast. They don't necessarily always. You might have an economist, right? They don't necessarily always have that. You might have a sector strategy that they might be able to support with, right? And so I do highly, highly encourage that communication between both parties. The LEA signature is required simply because student has to be scheduled and because our LEAs are paying for the exams. And so there is an LEA signature. And if you and the powers that be would like to require a local workforce board to be a signature on that, I'm sure that would be highly appreciated by our LEAs. But I know there's
I do think it should be required. I mean, local workforce boards, we're the ones that are engaging with the business community. We know what the current skills are, what are the current certifications needed in the future. Not that I know none of the LEAs will be doing this, but we just don't want LEAs to add certifications that there's no demand for this. So I think it's a good check and balance that the local workforce boards have reviewed this with their business. I mean, remember, local workforce boards are made up of 51% businesses, so you're getting that business in voice in this process. But I do think it should be required that the local workforce boards do validate these.
Noted. And also, Kirk, I'll just say that this is really our norming year. So kind of fine tuning the application and figuring out, okay, we weren't really clear about what artifacts needed to be with this. Or we're going to see both examples of, okay, this was a really good support document and so forth. So totally hear you. And I think, over the next, while we're going through this process, kind of after this, what we're going to do is kind of just sit down and kind of do, business rules and kind of fine tune these elements as well. So thank you. Appreciate that.
And I'll add too that I know that our WIP was working on the Upper Shore, like that. This was a conversation we were having with them last year of recommendations and being on the same page and getting support. So just speaking from ours, although it's not required, if Talbot County were to submit one right now, I would definitely include them, because from my perspective, if I'm going to go through the work of putting together artifacts, and you're basically building a case for yourself of why it's needed in your location, and you have to provide evidence, that's one of the first groups that I'm going to go to, for backing me up, so I think that it's probably happening 90% of the time, because like I said, you want to make sure that you have all the players supporting that when you go to the work of presenting this. So hopefully they would be, but I agree that we include everyone on everything else that we do, right? Like we turn in our MOUs for career counseling and for our fiscal reports, and we get all of those stakeholders to sign off. So I don't think it's much of a stretch to ask the LEAs to do that as well.
Thanks, Robin. And I'm definitely also going to star that. Molly and I will be best friends over the next 3-4 months and be doing that norming and doing that reflecting. Kirk, I also, of course, am very respectful of MSDE's role and engagement with, the local workforce boards. And so, we want to make sure that Molly and I are working within those respective spaces. And so I think we can add that to our norming list.
Definitely appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, no, thank you for your endorsement. I'm trying to keep us on track here, so I wanted to share some exciting, hot off the press news as early as 1 p.m. today. So MSDE, when it comes to the college and career readiness work, we have 2 core documents that are about to finish being in circulation. So the first one was a CCR guide that was released in July from Superintendent Wright that prioritized our 11th and 12th graders who were at risk of not, graduating with post-secondary plan or really meeting that CCR readiness standard. And so that went out in July. And then since July, MSDE has been working very closely across all content areas of teaching and learning to identify from 10th grade through to graduation, through to 10th grade, from kindergarten to 10th grade. How are we proactively at every single grade level across every single content area, supplying our schools with the information that they need to ensure that students are CCR ready by the time they're in 10th grade? That means that we have convened literacy, math, social studies, science, digital learning and literacy. We've spoken with MLL, we've spoken with special education, we have information from advanced academics. And so all of these folks have come together and they've really created this, it's a 199-page document at this time. And the way that it will be utilized is something like a chapter book. So if you're a 4th grade teacher and you're thinking, what are all the things that I have to know and be able to teach and the folks I need to partner with in order to make sure a student is CCR ready, I can go to the 4th grade section and I can see all of that. If I teach 7th grade math or 7th grade science, I can find my part of this workbook as well, and I can identify my piece. And so what it does is it memorializes a document where we are creating the roadmap from pre-K all the way up to 10th grade, every standard in literacy and math, all the best practices, how you integrate, college and career building identity strategies into core content areas. It creates a guidebook in order for everyone at MSDE who works in these respective areas to start doing a scope of learning around this document so that really you're seeing the way that everyone in teaching and learning and education plays a role in the college and career readiness of our young people. It's not just the OCCP team, right? But it's how does social studies, what is their role? What is literacy's role? What is MLL's role? What is special education's role? And so that is supposed to be published. I believe it's been promised from Dr. Wright by October 30th. Version 1 needed to kind of get one more edit. And so that should be on a website. So that's kind of the long-term goal. Rachel Stafford did reach out about that today, so I was able to update her. But I know that when Molly and Nicole were talking about their evidence-based strategies, when we were asking how are they going to track students over time, how are we building cycles of continuous improvement, the role of MTSS, all of these pieces are going to be built off this core foundation. And so we're just really excited that the CCR standard, was decided upon, and now we have built out as an entire team at MSDE, the multiple partners that will help us get from point A to point B. And then again, for those students who may not have achieved that CCR readiness standard, how are we layering that added support for 11th and 12th graders? So just wanted to let you guys know that that is in circulation. It was just elevated at 1 p.m. to move up the chain, and it should be coming out by the end of the month. So also happy to take questions there.
That's exciting.
Very.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
That is huge for our state. That is amazing. I'm excited to see the final publication.
Thank you. And there will be a QR code at the end. There's going to be a version 3. So the goal is to have updates each July. And so you're going to see this interconnectedness, but there's also a feedback form with a QR code in the back of the document that allows you guys to submit your commendations, that allows our LEAs to be spotlighted and to share their best practice, so that when we release a new document, it's going to include comprehensive arts, it's going to include physical education, it's going to include early childhood, it's going to include examples that you guys submit and you're excited about to learn from each other. And so we are really, really excited about it and excited for your feedback.
Thank you.
This is why people should attend and listen to our committee meeting. They get breaking news.
That's right. That's right. Christy, did you have a question?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to wear my Dave Harper hat and talk about community colleges briefly and just say that, you know, the previous conversation when IRCs are being developed, you know, reach out to the community colleges because I think we might help provide expertise if an LEA doesn't have it, or what can we offer the student who doesn't get the credential in high school but might want to finish it in community college. So I would just ask that at some point there's a consult with the community colleges. We would never want to approve or not, or just not nearly what Kirk would be doing. But I think just provide that conversation. We're doing it with career counseling, which has been really helpful. And it looks very different in every single county and every single LEA. And I think it would look very different here. But I think the community colleges could be a great resource in this. So sorry, I took us back a little bit, but I wanted to make sure I talked about that because I think it could be a great resource.
So glad that you stated the vital role of our community colleges. What we have also done is specifically identified support through our Perkins application. So any community college that submitted an IRC or an IRC and apprenticeship priority in their Perkins application, there was specific support extracted for that goal so that my team will be able to give really individualized support towards those goals. And then the other piece is I've been talking with Ellen Flowers over at CSM in order to talk about teacher tenant apprenticeship pipelines and things like that. And so that will only expand that work as well. So please continue to share recommendations. My email in the chat.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We have just 4 minutes left in this meeting. We've talked about a lot. We've talked about multi-tiered systems of support in Garrett. We've talked about early literacy in Prince George's County, and an update on IRCs. So is there anything else, any other comments before we start to think about our next meeting, which will be November 19th, that's going to be focused on career counseling?
I have one small comment to make about IRCs, and that's that, and this is just something that I know has been brought up before, but bringing it to light again, we have students that are earning IRCs outside of our LEAs. But they're being prepared by our LEAs, right? And community colleges and apprenticeship and lots of different supports along the way. Primarily, I'm thinking of like EMT programs that are supported by local volunteer fire departments. Those students are provided a pathway to do that. That's not traditional, but it's still just as important. And they are a product from the system that we are building, right? So, and I think that that's one of the unique examples of how students are able to complete multiple pathways sometimes and still do like apprenticeship and an IRC or do dual enrollment in some cases. So how can we capture those IRCs that are not completed within our buildings? Because I think that that is something that we're going to come across. You know, and even completing IRCs in some of our community colleges as well, right? Like we have a student who is doing an electrical program at Chesapeake College. It has an apprenticeship component added to it. I imagine there's an IRC. So as an LEA, how can we also collect data? And I don't expect anyone on this call to have that answer at 4:28 before we leave. But it is something that's important because it's a good problem to have, right? That there's lots of avenues, but in the end, like as an LEA, I want to make sure that I'm accurately reporting all of the great things that are happening in our district and all of the students that have earned it. And I just don't know what we're going to do as we have more students complete IRCs or apprenticeships that are outside of our LEA.
Yeah,
Just
Robin,
throwing
I'll
it out
try
there
to.
for the notes, like just something that I know it's going to need to be revisited. And I think of it as a small LEA. I find some of these things on social media because it's spread within the community that there were 2 students from this school that just did EMT from, Talbot EMS. So in a small district, like that's one thing I'm finding out about a couple, but I think about our larger districts, like that'd be very difficult for them to keep track of all of these students that sometimes earn them on their own.
I'll just jump in, Robin, and say yes, that's certainly on our mind. It's kind of part of this bigger sort of data ecosystem. How does this all work? Certainly we've started sort of discussions with Maryland Longitudinal Data System Centers because a lot of this is going to require third-party vendor data sharing agreements, which also take a lot of time to negotiate. But that all said, yes, in the perfect world, we do have these systems set up, and it certainly is sort of on the agenda to kind of think through and see where we can, what are the sort of the heavy hitters that we could start getting some of that data reported directly instead of to your point, through the LEA, hearing about it from someone, seeing it on social media or whatnot. So definitely on our mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think this is a great time to wrap up our meeting. Again, our next meeting is going to be November 19th. We're going to focus on career counseling unless we have an update until then. And we look forward to seeing you guys all again. And have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.